I did it. Oh, okay, I think I did it. Hello. Okay, yes, I can see now that I'm live. I can see that we've got some people watching. So, hello, everyone. Welcome. Sorry for the slight delay. Of course, I planned live, I had everything set up, and then at the last minute, everything decided not to work. Yertle decided it needed to be her story. So, thank you for being patient as I got everything set up. And welcome to today's live stream event, which is to sort of celebrate the end of a cross island trek that I did starting in Brooklyn near the Brooklyn Bridge. I went across the entire geographical span of Long Island, finishing up after 11 days at Montauk Point, which is the full 118-mile span of Long Island. Uh, which was super cool and hard and really interesting. And for those of you who have been following this project, you will know that this journey is part of a grant project, some grant work that I'm doing. And I do have a little thing to read and read grant stuff. So I will do that in 1 second. But to give you a brief overview of what the project is, I'm making a documentary film called 118, which is the length of Long Island in miles. And it is going to feature footage from my journey. I interviewed 12 different community leaders, activists, and advocates from Nassau County, Port Washington being the most westerly, to Center Moriches being the most easterly, and a dozen people over that trek. I walked between each interview. I'll be taking all that interview footage as well as footage of Long Island itself from Brooklyn to Montauk, and I'll be making a documentary film, which will be coming out this summer, which is really cool and exciting. That's like the second big endeavor now that I've made this journey. I now get to make an entire film, which is another sort of endurance project, I guess. But I'll do my little grant piece now so I can have that settled. This project is made possible with funds from the Statewide Community Regrant Program, a regrant program of the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, and is administered by the Huntington Arts Council, Inc. So that's that out of the way. Oops, I clicked a button and almost ended the live stream. I'm still here. Technology, it turns out, is going to be the most difficult part. It's not walking 118 miles. It's literally Google. But after all these years, what I wanted to do tonight is sort of do a little debriefing because it was such a huge project. And as I was doing it, something that really became clear to me is that I had not really explained it well or in sort of like any comprehensive scope to a lot of people. Even some of the people I was interviewing, parts of it were sort of missing for them. And uh, as people have observed my journey, I think it's become clearer, like what I'm actually doing, which is the walk and the documentary. But today will be a good opportunity for me to just talk about my experience walking, my experience interviewing people. If folks have questions about either or both of those things, or even the grant process and what that was like and what the application process was like, I'd be really, really happy to answer any questions that folks might have. If people are feeling a bit reticent or shy about offering up questions or don't necessarily have things, I do also have a list of some of the more commonly asked questions that I got as I was preparing for the walk and during the walk. So we can go through those. But if anyone does have a question about my project, my artistic project, or the 118-mile walk, please feel free at any moment to just put it in the chat and I'll sort of address them as I go. So, uh, while everyone is thinking of questions to ask, I guess I can just sort of speak a little bit generally about uh, the walk and what that experience was like. Uh, I have never, I mean, I've never done something like this in my life. I don't know that I ever really anticipated doing anything like this. I'm not even, I would not qualify myself as like an outdoorsy person. I'm not a hiker by any stretch of the imagination. I'm really not even. a walker or a runner, any of those sorts of things. So to do a project of this scale that incorporates something that is quite physical, um, it's like something I've never done before. I mean, honestly, I don't know that I'll ever do again, even though it was a really interesting and rewarding experience. Uh, I did train. This is a question I've gotten a few times. Like, did you going into this saying, I'm going to be walking 100 plus miles in 10 days? Were you training? I did. And I tried to do not just walking or not just sort of the more traditional, like, well, I'm going to be walking, so I should get out and walk. I should be getting out and running, building my endurance. I also tried to do, I guess, some strength training. I did a few times try to do a sort of like, I'm going to be having a pack. Let me try doing something carrying more weight than I'd usually be carrying. In retrospect, I probably should have done more of it because I definitely estimated the journey differently in my head than how it actually was. I imagined it because I knew I'd be walking through suburbs. I kept imagining for myself, and maybe it was like a comforting sort of mechanism to say, like, it's a walk. I'm just walking. I'll be walking on sidewalks. I'll be walking on roads. This isn't like the Appalachian Trail. This isn't, the Camino del Santiago, which my younger sister did. Uh, and I think if I was going to do it again, I would treat it a bit more like a hike in terms of how I'd gear up for it, the kinds of shoes that I chose. Another question that I got a lot, do you have a good pair of shoes? I did. I had a great pair of sneakers. I think I could have benefited from having hiking boots. And that's something that because I was thinking I'll be walking in a suburb, I never really even expected. So the logistics of the walking uh, was one big adjustment, even separate from the idea of this is going to be an artistic experience, and this is going to be, in some ways, like a personal experience of getting to see. Even though it's just one line, obviously Long Island is massive. Part of this project is the idea that Long Island is so big, and how do we as a community identify when we take up such a large geographical area. But I've still only seen, like the one thread of it. Uh, I've lost the original train of my thought. um, so we'll just leave it there because I can't remember the beginning of that thought. But that even though there were these other parts of the experience, like as an artist, as a creative, as an advocate and an activist myself, getting to have this experience, that I definitely, if I was going to do it again, I would have done a little more preparing as like the athlete who has to walk a distance, because it was a distance, and I definitely did feel the physical tolls in a lot of ways. So I can speak more about that. I do see that there's a question from Sonia. Sonia is actually one of the people who I interviewed for this project. So, Sonia, it's great to see you in the chat, and thank you so much. Sonia was my first stop in Fort Washington. And I got to say, she invited me into her home on my first day after I had walked 23 miles. And Sonia, maybe this is a TMI, but when I entered her beautiful house, and she offered me chai and snacks, and I got to see her beautiful garden, which has been rewilded, and all these things. We did a phenomenal interview, but it was my first stop, and I came into Sonia's home and took off my sneakers, and I was like, maybe she's gonna kick me out because my feet smell so bad. After the first 23 miles, it was all I was thinking about. I was like, I'm in Sonia's beautiful home, and I just feel like a grungy, stinky mess. I don't feel like an artist or a documentarian at all. I just feel like I've been walking 23 miles and now I'm here. But we had a phenomenal interview outside. Just a gorgeous day that first day. And now that I've wandered for so long, her question is, how do you plan to weave the talking heads and Long Island footage? It's a great question because um, I didn't do a lot of pre-planning. I am not a documentary filmmaker. I since the pandemic have become, I would say, like a video content creator. I'm here on YouTube making videos 2 times a week, which is something I really never thought I would do. I feel I've always felt a bit funny about film, honestly. I felt like, oh, well, that's something that, like, film is an art form. And so for me to just grab a camera and do stuff with it, I was like, well, can I? Am I able to? And the more I've tried it, the more I find that, like, yes, everyone can. Like, if you want to, you can, and, like, there will be obviously, like, some of my older videos, the editing has there's room for growth, but I think doing this project, taking on, like, the idea of, like, I'm gonna make a documentary, never having made a documentary, um, what I did find is whether or not I understand documentary as an art form, I do understand the idea of, like, story and narrative, and everyone has a sense for this, right? And as I was walking from place to place, listening to people speak about Long Island and organizing and the issues that Long Islanders are facing, narratives emerged naturally. Of course, there is a pretty obvious narrative, which is the progression geographically of Long Island is so interesting because, of course, at one end you have New York City, and at the other end you have an ocean. So I very much started in quite like a city area. I mean, I started in Brooklyn and then found myself, you go from like quite a metropolitan area to the suburbs. And then things start even to get more expansive as you head out east until suddenly you're in farmlands and beaches. And I do think that witnessing that progression as we see the issues change from Nassau to Suffolk would be quite an interesting thing to show, like, well, I was here in this place on this day. This is what the geography looks like, and this is what people are speaking of with the issues. So that's floated through my head a bit of sort of like chronologically having the footage show from Brooklyn to Montauk. And then, of course, the other thing that instantly emerges is similar themes. Like, it was interesting. I was interviewing my fourth interview, which was with Shahid Faruqi, who does work with ICNA Relief. We'd finished the interview, which was again great. All of the interviews were just phenomenal. And we got to the last question, and he was like, "Do you want to ask anything else? Like, aren't you worried that having the same set of questions, you'll get the same set of answers?" And I was like, "Not at all. Absolutely not at all," because of course, by then I'd done 4 interviews, so I had, some, like, empirical proof that, the answers would be different because they had all been different, but everyone has their own unique perspective. So even this main question that I was asking, which is, "What is the biggest issue Long Islanders are facing now?" I don't think I got the exact same answer twice. And I think something, that would be interesting actually, with, the talking heads footage especially is what became interesting for me is where do the answers converge? Like, there are some topics that every single person touched on, bar none. I mean, maybe they would say it in a slightly different way, but there are some things that emerge in every single interview. And then what's different? Like, where are the places that we diverge? And then I think that's quite interesting because, well, I mean, if we're talking about things like organizing and community solidarity, which is something that I'm obviously interested in showing in this documentary. We're always talking about like intersectionality of issues, and of course, like intersections also imply that there are offshoots. So each offshoot issue intersects, and that's important. But the intersectionality is just as important as the offshoot. And I think something that I really witnessed during these interviews was where do we intersect? Where do we diverge? And that's, I think, really special and really emblematic of like what I'm interested in, which is how do we as Long Islanders organize? And if there's a way to show that as well in the footage, because of course it's very tempting to say, well, I'll do, this interview, which was first, and then I'll just chronologically do it. But if there's a way to do maybe even both, show the chronological day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, but also show these are issues where there are 12 voices saying one thing, and over here there's maybe 2 saying this and it's the same, and here maybe it's one person speaking alone. But I'd like to show that. I honestly haven't sat down with any of the footage yet. I very much have been like decompressing and trying to like digest this whole thing because In some ways, it feels like a weird dream that I thought that I was walking across Long Island, and now, at the end I feel like at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream when they wake up and they're like, "Did we dream this or what?" I feel that way sort of now because thinking about it beforehand, the night before I started, I knew that I had an early day. So the first day, which was April 24th, a Sunday, I knew that I wanted to start early. This is another thing, in terms of planning, because I was walking everywhere, I was very cognizant of the fact that I wanted to walk only during daylight hours, and my first day, as I said, quite a long distance to go, and I knew I had to get up at 5 a.m. We had to be, like, leaving my home in Smithtown at 5 a.m. And so the night before, I tried to get in bed at, like, 9:30. I had everything packed, and I just couldn't sleep because, I just kept thinking of all the things that could possibly go wrong. Of course, like, with a project of this scale, I did a lot of pre-planning. I looked at the routes, I had all of my stops set out, I knew where I was staying, but I just kept thinking, "Oh, well, what if I've forgotten something very important? Or what if I start and then I realize I physically can't do it? Or what if what if something goes really wrong? What if I end up on a busy road and all of those sorts of things were in my head." So the enormity of it, like, in front of me was quite disquieting, like, right before I did it, when it came into my brain as an idea, I thought, "I can do that. I can definitely do it." And then the day before, there was this big sort of, like, reckoning moment that I had of, "Can I do it?" And now that I'm on the other side, I'm kind of having that opposite feeling where I kind of look back at it and I'm like, "Did I do it?" Did I? I know I did, but, um, I'm hoping that when I can sit down and look at the footage, I will be able to sort of, like, integrate it as, like, a memory rather than thinking of it as something like, "It could have been me doing it, it could have been someone else." Of course, my body is not letting me forget that indeed I was the person doing it, but, yeah, very I mean, very a very surreal experience, and one of those things where right after I finished, of course, everyone in my life, like my parents, my coworkers, my friends, like, a lot of people knew I was doing this, people on the internet knew I was doing it, of course, and then everyone was like, "How was it? Was it amazing?" And I've just found that even to now, I don't really have words to synthesize it, and I'm hopeful that in some ways making this documentary will also help me synthesize my experience. And feel free to put more questions in the chat. If not, I'm just gonna keep going through the ones that I sort of have prepared and discussing those. 'Cause there's definitely a lot to sort of parse through. Um, I thought I would talk a little bit about, the actual, outcomes of this project because that's in my last interview, which was with Rebecca Dolber in Center Moriches, we had spoken about the project because, of course, in some ways it feels like there are two different aspects of this project, one being interviewing community leaders and advocates and activists on Long Island and the documentary, and then another, which is the very real facts that I did a full cross Long Island trek, Brooklyn to Montauk, and I had, like, a very personal experience of doing something that I think counts as, like, quite like an intense physical feat, and she sort of asked me, like, "How do those things connect? What is the crossover between the interviews and your personal journey?" And that's a question that I've been really, like, kicking around as an artist, like, as a person who is a creative because in some ways, they're obviously intrinsically linked because I'm the person making the documentary and I did the walk and I was conducting the interviews as I went. And in some ways, they do feel very separate. And so I wanted to just briefly mention that. Of course, I will be releasing the documentary, which will feature the advocates' interviews and testimonies, as well as images from my walk. But I think it's more likely than not that I won't appear in the documentary, which I think when I mentioned that to Rebecca, really sort of threw her for a loop. She was like, "You're not gonna appear in it?" But, I don't think that I'm going to. Oh, Jonathan says, "Congrats, you're amazing." Thanks, Jonathan. That's really nice. Thank you. I just honestly to sort of sidebar, we'll come back to the content question, but what I found was amazing was that I was granted this opportunity by the Huntington Arts Council and, all of the New York State regrants programs that were disseminating funds for this. When I wrote the application, I had this idea ages ago about walking across Long Island, and when I filled out the application, I just thought, "There's no way." I really thought, "There is no way my project is going to get picked," because I think they're gonna take one look at this and say, "It's too big, they can't do it, it's just too much." It's just too much 'cause it's the project is it I thought there would be a bit of like, well, it's a great project, but maybe not for us. So when I received the grant, I was super, super happy and like very, very delighted that they were gonna take a chance on this project because I got the sense when I went to the awards ceremony that my project is quite unusual for what they usually get, and that's not in like a judgment way, like oh, it's better or it's worse, or just that it's an unusual project. So I was really grateful that they took a chance on it and on me to say, do you know what? This is a big project, but I really think it's possible. I think they can do it. Um, because in some ways it made me have to go, okay, I'm gonna do it. I've said I'm gonna do it, and now I'm gonna do it. Um, so it was nice to have. Um, Sometimes I come up with artistic ideas, and then I sort of am like, maybe I'm the only person who thinks this is possible. So it was really, really nice to have a little bit of validation in that sense to say, do you know what, this is a project that is worth doing, and we think you can do it. I really appreciated that. And now to sort of swing back around to content stuff. So, of course, as I said, one thing will be the documentary, which will be out this summer. A little bit more immediately than that, I did try to do like daily vlogs as I was traveling. Now, these vlogs, well, I will say I did my best to vlog from the road as much as I could because I thought this is interesting to people. I can show myself actually walking, saying how I'm feeling in the moment with my phone, just like, "Hi, day 6, feeling good so far," that sort of thing. And I managed to get a decent amount of footage. So, um, except for there was one day I didn't vlog at all, and I was like in my bed at the end of the day, and I was just like, Elena, you haven't documented a single second of this day. So I did one right in bed just to like round it out. I will have that footage edited, not next week. I'm gonna do something unheard of, everyone. I'm gonna take a break from YouTube for a week. I know. I'm shocking for me. I know I'm always doing something, but next week I'm gonna have a no content week. I'm just gonna do a bit of like recovery and all that good stuff, lying on my bed with my cat. And then I think the week after that, I should have a video for my channel that is more of like behind the scenes. Here's Elena on the road. Here's Elena on a bike in the rain. Here's Elena crying on the roadside in Brookhaven. Can't go to Brookhaven anymore. Just gonna give me flashbacks to that day 8. Day 8 was sort of like the dark night of the soul for me. That was a tricky one, but that will be going up on my channel as well. So there will be hopefully a little bit of both. Also, if you haven't been on my website, which I'll put in the chat, it is just my name, but I'll put it anyway. elenafaverio.com. If you head to my website, I have a page that is labeled writing. Usually I'm putting creative writing up there, but while I was on the road, I tried to do a blog every day, sort of like day 2, here are the highlights, here were the things that went well, here were the things that are hard, You can enjoy sort of like the running litany of all of my aches and pains, some of the colorful characters that I met on the road, because of course, if you're walking in public, you're going to be meeting people, you're going to be having daily interactions. So all of those blogs are up. I think I have one from every day except for the final day. About halfway through my trip, someone on Instagram really kindly let me know that the blogs weren't actually publishing to my website besides the title. So luckily I managed to find a public library and remedy that. So thoughts from the road are available on my website. What else shall I speak about? For folks who are just joining us, welcome. Glad to have you here. If you have any questions for me about my trek across Long Island, please do put them in the chat and I'll try to answer them. I'm sure most of you know by now, but this 11-day trek is also part of a creative grant that I got to make a documentary about Long Island advocates and community leaders. So feel free to ask questions about that as well. I feel like I can answer some of the, I made a video previously where it was like FAQs, things that people were asking me about, some of which I mentioned already, but a big question that I've gotten from my interviewees, mostly because we were able to speak about the documentary, is what was the idea for this grant project in general? So I guess I can talk a little bit about that. I do see a question in the chat. What was your total distance? Do you know? I do know. I did the math today, but I'm going to announce it at the end of the stream. So if you want to make guesses in the chat, feel free. I have a few guesses that were submitted on my Instagram or on my Facebook. So I've got those written down. For reference, if you want to make any guesses, Long Island is 118 miles long. Now, if you've been following my journey on Instagram or on the blogs, you will know, so this is not a spoiler, I don't think, I went farther than that. I obviously was going to destinations, so I had to zigzag. There was one memorable day where I walked from the South Shore to the North Shore, then back down to the South Shore. So I did go over 118. And if you want to make any last minute guesses throughout this live stream, feel free to put them in the chat and I will let you know at the end. And I'll tell you a little bit about the inspiration for the project. So I was born on Long Island. I was born in a hospital that's like a few miles from the house that I'm currently in. I grew up in Smithtown. I did leave Long Island for college. Then I lived in Massachusetts for a little bit after college, moved back home, and then spent some years in London getting a degree. But for the majority of my life, I have lived on Long Island. And it took coming back after my master's degree, at which point I went and got my MFA in acting, which most of you know about. I have always been interested in social justice issues and have been active mostly within like my university spheres and always in the theater realm. I tried to do a lot of advocacy, like in my industry, at my drama school, things like that. But of course, when I graduated from Guildhall, I had just gotten my MFA in acting. I came back to Long Island, did my showcase. I got my first professional paying gig in January of 2020. You see where this is going. Pandemic happened, that shut down. And then, of course, a massive civil rights movement happened after the murder of George Floyd. And I became very, very active in our local advocacy scene. Most specifically, I was organizing with Long Island United to transform policing and community safety. In line with the Executive Order 203 reform, we were working on police reforms in Nassau and Suffolk County with varying degrees of success. I'm not going to go directly into that on this live stream, although I am still extremely active in that realm, and I'm like very delighted to be. I think it's hard work, but important work. And one of the amazing things about getting involved with LI United is that I was talking about the intersection of issues earlier. Of course, every issue intersects, and in every organization, you'll find people who have ties to other organizations. So Through my work with LI United, I found myself getting a little bit involved with Suffolk DSA and Nassau DSA. I found myself getting more involved with RAP, which is Release Aging People in Prison, and bail reform movements and decarceral work. And it just sort of spider webs from there, meeting people from different orgs, getting to know what they do, and really sort of uncovering the Long Island progressive advocacy and activism network, or at least bits of it. I'm sure there are, of course, it's in the way that anything, like, you can only ever see like the part that you're looking at. I knew it was larger than even what I was seeing and touching. So I found that really inspiring, honestly, because growing up on Long Island, I always felt very isolated. I felt, especially in Smithtown, that it was quite um, a homogenous and conservative community. There wasn't a lot of like security or support for diversity, and of course, that can be quite disheartening when you're growing up in a place like that, looking for people who are sharing your values. So to come back home after 27 years and finally be able to say, well, there is this community, and what is this community like, and how can I interact with this advocacy community, was very inspiring to me on one end. And as soon as I started organizing with LI United, you may sort of guess it from the name, LI United is a Nassau Suffolk organization. So we're dealing with police reform, the Nassau County Police, the Suffolk County Police, all of the different like little towns and hamlets that have their own police departments. We're trying to interact and intersect with all of those precincts and all of those areas. And I got very involved in organizing. I was on steering of LI United for a while and trying to think, well, how can we organize Long Island? How can we, as a small but mighty group of intrepid organizers, how can we actually organize communities of Long Island from Nassau to Suffolk? That's what we're looking at. And then, of course, the advocacy and organizer part of my soul was going, well, actually, how can we? And meanwhile, like the artist creative part of my heart was coming up with like all these questions, like, well, what is Nassau and Suffolk? Like, what does that actually mean? And how can we create, like, what is cohesive and what is different? Like, where are we the same on issues? Like, where are we saying we need the same things, and where are we saying we need different things based on what part of Nassau, what part of Suffolk? We talk about Long Island being one of the most segregated places in the United States, which it is, but what does that actually mean for us as people and organizers? So this was a question that had sort of been like churning in my heart as a person from Smithtown who is organizing across Long Island, spent, so long driving to the Nassau County Legislature for hearings, or driving out to Riverhead to testify at the Suffolk County Legislature meetings. And I say, well, how can we organize like this? Especially in Long Island, which is so vast and unwalkable and really doesn't have a lot of public transportation options. You really need a car to get around. Like, what does it actually mean to like get around and see all of Long Island and try to like understand it in some small way? Which basically led to this idea that I had as someone who, was born only a few miles from the spot that I'm sitting in, which is how can I try to get a small scope into what it means to be Long Island, to understand Long Island in like a totality sense. And whether or not that's an achievable goal, of course, like, I don't know. I really don't know. Of course, like, to say my goal for this grant project in some ways, in the personal part of the journey, is to like understand Long Island geographically, like as a whole entity. I don't think it's possible. Of course, I don't think it's possible. And I already know I've like identified certain ways in which I failed. Of course, like with any project, it's my first time doing it. So there are definitely things that I would have done differently. And one of the most outstanding things, which I'm hoping I can work into the documentary as well, because it's a big oversight, is I don't have anyone, I have not been able to speak to anyone from the Shinnecock Nation, which I think is obviously a massive oversight if we're talking about what is Long Island. I wasn't able to make a connection to include any of the people on the Shinnecock land, and that's something that I'm still like, how can I remedy that? And that's a question that I have, whether I may go actually see if I can do another interview, even if it's separate from this idea of the walk, because of course it seems very critical to have indigenous voices from indigenous Long Islanders as part of a documentary that is about Long Island. So um, that's, of course, one thing that I've been thinking about throughout. Uh, and that's really it's like a big question, and it's an intricate question, and I know that in some ways people could listen to it and be like, well, that's just impossible. I think that's okay. I think, you know, uh, in some ways, if I wanted as an artist to solve I don't think artists want to solve possible questions necessarily. I think like art for me in some ways is a way to say, well, I don't know. I don't really know. And let's see if we can find out. And if we can't find out in one documentary, I will say one of the most rewarding things about this entire process was the interviews. Of course, I think, I've got, I haven't spoken at all about my background, but my mom made me this sign when she came to pick me up in Montauk. This is me. I think it's quite good, actually. I mean, I can say my hair did look like this for pretty much the entire trip. I've given myself a haircut since, but it was indeed standing up. And I've got my congratulations balloons. I I do like accept that walking across Long Island is a huge undertaking. And I absolutely like am celebrating that it was big and it was hard and I did it. But all of that said, and putting my feet into the ocean at the end was amazing. I did at one point just yell, "I did it!" And it would have been fine, but there were like 2 families walking down the beach. It's like trying to have a nice day, and I was just standing in the ocean yelling. And I was like, "These people are just trying to have a normal Wednesday, and here I am." To sort of cycle back around to the point I was making. The walk on itself, I know it sounds impressive and it sounds amazing, and it was amazing. The thing that was my absolute favorite was sitting down to talk to everyone. Hands down, uncomparably, if that's a word, or incomparably. Absolutely, just phenomenal. Phenomenal. Sonia's saying I made the days of the people who I was screaming. Maybe, I hope. Uh, I mean, you know, people, I always hear this word like, I want to amplify, especially with social media being so prominent now. We talk about like amplifying voices, amplifying stories. And to the point where it almost feels a little bit like a meme of itself, like, I'm gonna amplify this issue, but I really, in some ways, think that it is so important for us to, like, as a community of people who want to make Long Island a better place, to be amplifying our own stories in the way that we wanna tell them, rather than saying, "Okay, let's." Of course, it's always there is some importance to amplifying things on social media, making them visible, or just amplifying things through traditional media channels like the news or radios or newspapers, things like that. There is value in that. And I also think that there is value in just speaking to each other within our communities and saying, "What are you doing? Like how can I help you? What do you need? What is your story?" I very much enjoyed that. And that was one of the questions I asked as well. I had a list of 7 questions, and one of the questions that I tried to ask everyone was how can Long Islanders support you? How can we support your work? Um, because I also hope that eventually, continuing to have conversations like this can also be a roadmap for people who want to get involved but don't know how. To say, here's literally what we need, and maybe it's money, maybe it's time or attention, or any number of things, but here it is, and we'll tell you what we need. Like, we are telling you what we need, and it's available for you. Um, I didn't even think about, like, sort of sharing the list of questions. Um, I do have them all memorized, but I feel like I don't know if sharing them is, like, giving away the game or not, but, maybe I'll hold them all for now. I do see that there are some guesses in the chat as to how far I went in total. Jonathan, I see that you've changed you wanna change your answer a bunch of times. I think it's fine to keep putting guesses in until maybe I'll do, like, 10 more minutes of chatting, and then I'll release the, total mileage, so if people wanna get their guesses in until then, I think it's safe. Sonia's just done one. I see so far in the chat, I see 182, 175. Jonathan's gone 135 and then to 148. And then Sonia's just put in 187. My sisters asked me, did you save the Instagram guesses? Yes, I did. I've got them all written down right here. So if you already put in a guess on Instagram, I have it logged. So yeah, does anyone else have specific questions about the she said good because I forgot mine. Yeah, does anyone else have a question that they're thinking of that I can answer either about the logistics of walking from Brooklyn to Montauk or the process of interviewing local advocates and activists? There's of course no shortage of things for me to mention from this trip. A big question that I've been getting actually, I think one of the most common questions that I got had well, 2. It's sort of I find that they're quite similar questions, which is, what was the most surprising part of your trip? Or like, what was the most memorable part of your trip? Oh, okay. Well, as I said that in the chat, my older sister has just written, "Oh, tell us your biggest surprise on the route," AKA dirt road down bridge. I don't know what dirt road down bridge means. I guess like like detouring and stuff like that. Um, my biggest surprise. It's hard to say because in some ways there was nothing that was so overwhelmingly surprising that it like derailed my journey or anything. There were definitely inconveniences. There were definitely things that were inconveniences. There were definitely things that were impactful. And there are definitely things that were, like, delightful. And I was like, "This is great. I'm really enjoying this." Like, if suddenly a sidewalk appeared or if, like, a detour took me past something really beautiful or really, like, interesting, I quite like that. I think something that I quite liked, Kimberly said, "You are delightful." Oh, thank you. Oh, wow, thanks. Something that I really liked, like, right off the bat from day 1. Well, first of all, on day 1, something that was surprising was I figured I'd be doing about 20-minute miles, and I started off doing about 18-minute miles. Of course, that lasted for approximately 12 miles. And then every day after that, I did about 21-minute miles. But honestly, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed the walking. I think I was very, very nervous that I would start, and especially I do have an old injury. If you've been following my blog, you know, pretty much on day 2, it started acting up. And I think it was the morning of day 3 where I was sitting in a Dunkin' Donuts and I had a bit of a wobble where I was like, I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to do it. Um, so ultimately, by the end of the trip, something that was quite surprising and in a good way was that uh, I was getting up and doing 15-mile days. Like that was fine. I was like, yeah, this is doable. 15 miles, doable. Anything over 20, doable, but dubious. Anything close to 30, don't even talk to me, don't even look at me, bring me my bike, as some of you know. There was one day where I did have to switch to a bike because of, my injuries giving me issues, and I had quite a long day, so, um, that's for sure. Kimberly said, "Come canvas." I'll do a little bit of a shameless plug. I was canvassing before as I was getting ready for this, I was doing canvassing for Jeremy Joseph, out in District 7. So I feel like I did get some practice, doing like 3-hour shifts, 4-hour shifts, walking around. He had me canvassing in Roslyn Heights, which is like one giant hill. I was like, Jeremy, what have I done to you? Jonathan's asking if I hit any good nature preserves. I did, but the sort of issue is that I couldn't tell you any of their names. I will say, as I got farther out east, of course, like the landscape began to change. Going from Nassau into Suffolk was probably the most difficult in terms of like, I'm walking down 25A now, don't know how that happened, or oh wow, there's a sidewalk. Now it's ended. Now I'm on a bit of a trafficy kind of road. I don't know if I should be here, if I should turn off. That was quite prominent in like the latter half of Nassau into Suffolk. And then once I got out pretty much past like Sayville and then of course past Center Moriches, the scenery was beautiful. I passed, I mean, countless parks, countless nature preserves. Of course, going out, once I was on the fork towards Montauk, there's pretty much just like a huge preserve. I passed parts of the excuse me, the Greenbelt Trail as well, which I never actually got to walk on, but I did see some like trailheads for that. And it would have been interesting to do part of it, but I think where I was, it was kind of north to south. And at that point, I was like, I need to be heading towards Montauk. That's it. um, yeah, I will say, I have been saying this to people, but not a surprise necessarily, but one of the most impactful things from the walk was just seeing. Again, I mentioned this earlier. We talk about Long Island being segregated. We talk about like communities being right next door to each other, where one is very well funded by the state. They've got a lot of government resources. There's no garbage on the streets. The park is beautiful. It's open all day, no fences. And then you cross into the next town and it's clearly somewhere where resources are not being disseminated. There is not funding going into keeping the town clean. There are not as many shops, things like that. I mean, that was very, very prominent. Seeing the actual segregation and the way that, you can cross the street and it's like being in a completely different place. Seeing that firsthand was really impactful for me to say, like, this is it. This is what we talk about. And obviously this is coming from a place of privilege, having grown up in Smithtown. But being in a place that is one of those like, there are really not cops around and there's, it's kept quite beautiful here and quite clean and to sort of live in that bubble and grow up in that bubble, to have my walk be like, okay, and I'm constantly crossing between neighborhoods that have different resources and, different police presences. And, one has a gorgeous park and the other one, it's been under construction. It's not opening up till 2024. And there's, that kind of a thing was quite impactful to see it. What did your muscle recovery look like? Oh, I think it's ongoing, honestly. I think it's ongoing. On the walk, I tried to do, as I said earlier, do most of my walking during the day. So I tried to get to my Airbnb or my friend's house or my hotel by like 3 or 4 at the latest. So I was doing quite early mornings, which my body is still in the middle of. I don't find that I mind it. I quite like it actually. And essentially, what I tried to do is as soon as I got to where I was staying, I would drop everything. I had a lot of electronics I had to plug in. I was, carrying my tripod in my backpack. I was carrying all of my camera equipment, my microphones. So I'd charge in all my batteries and my phone and my backup battery. I'd get all that stuff squared away. And then I would take a really hot shower, sort of like loosen up the muscles, get my shoulders from the pack, and then instantly do quite a long stretch, usually like 20 minutes of stretching, put some arnica on and get my feet up. And that was uh, pretty much every night I tried to do it, and then usually every, like, 45 minutes to an hour, I try to get up. I felt that, of course, stopping is great, and then sometimes starting again was hard, so I tried to, like, get up, have another stretch, check on my feet, check on my ankles. I did try icing one night, but found that it was more helpful than hurtful. So wait, more hurtful than helpful. Scratch that, reverse it. So I didn't do much icing. And since being home, I've tried to just sort of continue moving. That's one thing that my little sister recommended to me. She said, active recovery. And I was like, what is that? And she said, keep that booty moving, which is a direct quote. So I've been trying to do at least a mile and a half, 2 miles of walking a day. And sort of the same deal, take like a nice hot shower or a bath with some Epsom salts, arnica if I need it, do a bit of a stretch. I've luckily been pretty much weaned off of the anti-inflammatories now. I'm not experiencing lots of pain, so that's been good. And letting my blisters heal, and that's kind of it. I've been bouncing back pretty well, and thank you for asking. And I see a question from my mom. She's asked, has your connection to Long Island changed following this walk? And if so, how? I think it has. I think it has in the way that I will always recognize the places that I walked now, um, in the way that I just wouldn't from driving. I've always considered myself as the kind of person who doesn't have a good sense of direction. I would say that about myself, like, oh, I don't have a good sense of direction. I don't, blah, 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 blah. And I think it's just come from being, as I said before, Long Island doesn't have a lot of public transportation. You kind of need a car to get around, especially if you're going between towns, which is something that I really noticed. Even if some towns were walkable, to get between towns, having a car is really useful. Some of those roads were the ones that for a walker was really, really challenging, especially once I got out of Brooklyn and Queens. That just physically being somewhere has given me a different impression of it. Just physically being in a space, being in some towns that I had never been to before. I mean, Sayville is a place that I've never been. Port Washington, I have been briefly, but to go there and have a new experience there, or to spend time, walking around Brentwood, actually being able to visit people in person, because some of these people, for example, in Brentwood, I went to visit Serena Liguri from New Hour, and Serena is a person who I wouldn't necessarily say we organize together, but again, she's doing decarceral work and reentry work, and I'm doing police reform. So of course, those are intersecting issues, and we have worked on similar campaigns. We've been on the same Zoom calls, but to be able to go to that gorgeous campus and actually see their space, meet the people who are working in the office, I mean, it just is an amazing experience, and more so than my relationship with Long Island, I would say, like, my sister said in the chat, sense of place 100 from walking. Yeah, just walking through a place, physically being in the place, having like those landmarks of, yeah, that's the Dunkin' Donuts that I stopped to pee in, or like even that kind of stuff, which seems silly. I just feel like I'm a bit more grounded in terms of like, okay, I get it. I've been there and I get it. And I think in some ways, again, I'm going to make sort of like a loop back around, but the big question at the heart of my walk and my documentary is about community and organizing in community. And something that came up in a lot of my interviews is not is the idea that a lot of our change, like, we expect sometimes that a lot of our change in communities will come from the work of like elected officials, but oftentimes these people have no ties to the communities and have not physically been in community with the people that they're representing. And I feel that I spoke to more than one person who was like, I see that my legislator or my state senator is at these galas, or they're with certain groups, but they're not coming here. They're not meeting the people here, like, who are doing the work that I'm doing on the ground in the communities with the people. And I think that even my small experience, like I said, of this like one track line from Brooklyn to Montauk, I know that line now. If you drop me down in the middle of it, I may not be able to get to Montauk, but I could get myself somewhere recognizable. That there is like already like some sort of memory and sense building. And it just reminded me that when we're talking about things like organizing a community, like we need to be in community, whatever that means. My dog downstairs is choosing now to make a calamity, so apologies for that. But I think it rather than recontextualizing my relationship with Long Island, it sort of led me to reassess my feelings about like community and what it means to be in community with people and the value of it. The value of it. So I think my next sort of or my takeaway from this will be like, how can we facilitate community in a place that is, in some ways really difficult to navigate? We spoke about like, or I spoke about, I'm just monologuing, inaccessibility in like Nassau and Suffolk with public transport and needing a car and the gas prices and things like that. How can we facilitate more opportunities for community? Yeah. Food and coffee along the route. Thank you for that question. Yeah. Um, Food and coffee. I didn't drink any coffee as I was walking. I find that coffee makes me really anxious, and I thought if I'm walking on busy roads, that's kind of the last thing I need. But I did drink a lot of tea. I feel like the free bathroom in Dunkin' Donuts was the best thing that ever happened to me. Something that also was interesting was sort of noting where just to note where you could just walk in and say, "I'm using the bathroom," and where you needed a key or a code. I thought that was sort of telling, like, we're talking about, like, things that should be accessible to communities. Um, as far as food, it was tricky, honestly, because I had such a tight schedule and I didn't wanna do more walking. So, the name of the game was pretty much to say, "Well, where can I eat that is going to be relatively nutritionally valuable to me because I'm walking. I want to be like well fueled, and it's not going to be out of my way because I can't do any more walking than I'm already doing. So I ended up being like marginally successful with that. There were a few nights where I was able to DoorDash in good food, which was really nice, and then some nights where I just had to stop for something quick. And again, shout out to Jeremy, who I'm mentioning also because I interviewed him and I stayed with him as we're buddies. I got to his place. I visited Jeremy in Hicksville and we were gonna have dinner. And he was like, "Oh, there's a halal place really close." And I was like, "Sorry, Jeremy, like, I really, really, really appreciate that you're having me here, but like, please, can I give you money and you can go get it? Because I can't walk any farther. I just can't." And like, he did. So like, thank you. 10 out of 10. You really helped me. um, yeah, I wish I could have um I think like in another life where this project was different and it was more about seeing and experiencing like Long Island culturally, which is like a weird way to say because I'm like, well, what is Long Island culture? I feel kind of weird even saying that it exists, but like the way that Long Island is set up and like the restaurants and shops and places of Long Island. If it was more of one of those kinds of trips, which I think someone may have done on TikTok, they like walked across Long Island and like, talked about the history or something. Someone mentioned this to me. I don't know anything about it, so don't take any of this as gospel. Um, uh, if I had done something that was a bit more relaxed in terms of timeline, it might have been interesting to do more of like I'm gonna stop at like a restaurant that is well known or that sort of thing. But for what I did to get to where I needed to go, to see the people I wanted to see, to have the whole route and have it happen in 11 days, I did as best as I could, which was still pretty good, I thought. And there's another question here. Do you plan to connect with the woman walking from NYC to Greenport to raise awareness for medical debt? No, I didn't even know that that was happening, but that's really cool. I think, and also like a great and worthy cause. Like, if you have any links to that, like, feel free to absolutely drop them in the chat. If there's, I don't know what this person is looking for, whether it's media attention or financial support. But if there's something that you want to put in the chat about that, that's amazing. Really cool. Yeah. Okay, so it's coming up on an hour of me talking about this project. I think I've covered a lot of ground. Of course, I there will be more content coming out about this. As I said, next week I'm not making any videos because I'm just going to take some time to like reorganize my life, sort through everything that I've been neglecting for the past week and a half or so. But do expect more content about this. Um, I'm hoping that I might have even some like documentary teaser footage sometime this month. Don't hold me to that, but the hope is there. So please, if you're here and you're not already subscribed to my channel, definitely subscribe. I make 2 videos a week. It's not always me walking from Brooklyn to Montauk. I will say that's probably a once in a lifetime event for me, but I do make all sorts of content. I try to make one video that is a bit more chatty, not as long as this, but more similar to this, where I can just like chat. And then one video that is a bit more artistic. Sometimes it's music, sometimes it's poetry. This month I'll be doing a bit more content around 118, my project. And then next month I'm going to be doing a bunch of Pride content because it's Pride Month. So please do look forward to that. And I suppose I will round out this lovely Q&A. Thank you all for being here, by the way. I know it's Mother's Day and a Sunday night, so thank you for stopping by to hear more about my project. I'll round it out by announcing my total logged mileage from Brooklyn to Montauk. Now, you may be asking, Elena, how did you keep track of your mileage? How do you know it's accurate? That's a great question. Honestly, it's probably a little inaccurate. I did track most of my walk through just like a Map My Run app, which was great because it actually maps it out for you. So at some point I am going to sit down with all my maps and like trace out the exact route that I took. The issue is it starts to map your run when you press start, and it stops when you press stop or pause. And sometimes I would press pause and then be like, I've walked 4 miles and never hit start again. I did try to go back and like remedy those little gaps, but my number may be slightly low. I reckon it would only be low by like 1 or 2 miles. So without further ado, everyone's gotten their guesses into the chat. Some other guesses that I had on Instagram, I got 112 miles from my buddy, which was very cute and very funny. I was like, my project is 118. It wasn't going to be lower than 118, but I really appreciate you guessing. So 112 miles, 138 miles, 158 miles, 167, 180, and 200. So without further ado, drum roll. My total mileage from Brooklyn to Montauk was 179.43 miles. That's it. That's it. Thank you so much. If you've been following my journey since the first video that I put out, I don't know even what it was now, some 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. Thank you so much for being here the whole time. If you're joining this live stream today and you're like, I really don't know what this is about, but I'm interested in learning more, welcome. There will be more content. As I said, it will be on my channel, and the documentary will also be available on my channel this summer for free. I am planning on doing a live premiere at a movie theater somewhere on Long Island. So I'll announce that on Facebook and my Instagram. So if you're following me there, great. I'll try to announce it on my channel as well, possibly when I put out the trailer. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you, of course. I know Sonia's watching today. I'm not sure if any of my other participants are watching this stream or not, but regardless, it just needs to be said. Every single person that I interviewed, from Port Washington to Santa Mauritius, was amazing, just really phenomenal, and very inspiring to listen to them speak about their work and their efforts to make Long Island a better place, because there is so much work to do and it can feel insurmountable. And I know often the news out of Long Island can be really scary and really disheartening, but there are people doing this work. There are organizations who are out in the communities in solidarity together, doing the work that needs to be done. And I think as always, we just need to let it inspire us, galvanize us, and get to work on these issues because change is possible. I know it is possible. And I am just inspired to be able to speak to people who are out there working to make that change. And on that note, I will see you not Wednesday, not Sunday, but the Wednesday after that for, I think, a behind the scenes look at my journey. So make sure you come back for that. And I'll see you soon. Okay. Bye.